Please call the roll.
Ms. Groff.
Here.
Ms. Phillips.
Here.
Mr. Skrull.
Here.
Ms. Cowan.
Here.
Mr. Belfrom.
Here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Need a motion to approve? I didn't think so.
Special meeting, we can only meet for one item.
Gotcha. All right, with that, the one item we have on the agenda this evening is a district finance presentation and discussion. So, Mr. Morrow, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you. Over the last couple of months, we've talked a lot about the district finances, updating on where we're at currently, dug into some details. In just last meeting, we started to talk a little bit about how we're going to solve our financial issues. And one of those options is a levy. So we kind of wanted to dig a little bit more into what a potential levy would look like. We'll start off with kind of touching on the highlights from the last meeting. Last two meetings, actually. So in May, we presented that Kings is consistently rated in the top 50 school districts in Ohio. And that is true this year as well. But we spend substantially less than most districts in Ohio. In 2021, we were ranked 352nd out of 607 schools. And at the last meeting, we showed 5 years just to show that this wasn't a one-off fluke. We're consistently in that range while consistently being a top 50 school. And what we do spend a high proportion of that is on instruction and student services. That was over 70%. And I actually compared that percentage to some of the highest performing districts in all of Ohio. And we were right with them on they all spend more, but the percent of what we do spend was all the same for instruction, administration. So I was trying to find a metric of, are we spending our money how we should be? And by all indications, we are. We also talked about how we don't have a lot of support from the state. We're consistently ranked in the 500s out of 607 schools for the amount of money that we get through the foundation formula, which is the main funding mechanism for schools in the state of Ohio. And then we also talked about last meeting, some of the things that we've done as a district in the last 2 to 3 years to try to save money without reducing student services. And that was a key thing. It's how can we trim along the edges and be efficient and be creative and not affect the product that our kids are getting. Talked in detail about the top 4 items on the list that make up that 1.6 million. More than happy to entertain any questions about those, but there's 2 other things that we've talked about quite a bit that were left off of that page. And I wanted to make sure I pointed out to the board. We outsource our transportation, and a part of it are custodial services to private companies. There's cost savings there. There's administrative savings there. And that's something that we've continued to do. We didn't put that into effect, so it wasn't included in the 1.6 million in the last few years, but it is something that we do as a district that makes us agile, and it is a smart move. And then also, that was something that was talked at length about last year. We're in the process of streamlining the services now for next year. Meaning that we'll be asking parents, will your students be utilizing King's transportation? That allows us to efficiently route the buses. And then as we get that efficient routing done, we can start to explore additional cost savings, additional ways that the district can save money on transportation. we've taken a big step in outsourcing that to a private company, but the next step is to explore what else can we do outside of what we've already done while impacting as few students as possible. So we'll be taking a look at that in the coming year. It's not something we want to just throw out in front of the board. We want to really take our time and make sure we do a good job and have all the research done. And that's not to say that that wasn't done last time, but we have fresh board members, fresh superintendent, fresh treasurer. So we just need to take another look at it and make sure we're providing you with the best recommendation that we can.
And when you say that specifically, Mike, you're talking about, our busing tiers, start times, et cetera.
Correct. So last spring, there was a proposal that was given to the board by the current administration at the time to basically make 3 start times to the day, with Columbia being the third. So every school's start time would be different than what it ended up being. So we just want to take a fresh look at that, get our routes as efficient as possible with the streamlining, and then use that data to help make a informed recommendation to the board. And we'll have some more discussions about that in the coming months, but we need some time to make sure we get it right. Just some additional information about King's Local that I've learned and I thought was good for the board and community to hear. Taking all projections out of this, the reality is we have 4,600 K-12 students in our buildings right now, and that's up from 4,120, so 480 additional kids compared to 2016. And that doesn't take into account preschool. Back in 2016, we had 100 preschoolers. Now we're up to 220. So if you look at those two numbers, we're up 600 kids from where we were in 2016. And also wanted to point out that we've nearly doubled the number of students with special services that are in preschool. As we've discussed before, we do what we can to meet kids' needs and get them what they need. So yes, we do spend quite a bit more money than we did in 2016, nearly $16 million per year. So I wanted to take a look at that and say, is that out of bounds compared to the rest of the world, the rest of the state? So I looked at it on a pure pupil level, because that kind of normalizes things. If you just look at what we spend now to 16, we're spending money on an additional 600 kids. So this last year we spent $12,426 per student. And in 2016, that number was $10,758 per student. So if you take that by every year, that's roughly 3.1%, plus some additional rounding. So I said, what does that mean? How does that compare? So we started looking at the state average. The average district in Ohio is spending 4.6% more per pupil. So I said, okay, we compared pretty well to that. How about we look at some national trend? Now, the Social Security cost of living adjustments was 2.7% per year. So on a per pupil basis, our spending has gone up less than the state average, and it's pretty close to in line with what folks are getting in cost of living adjustments through Social Security.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Interrupt me whenever, please.
All right, so I have 2 questions. Go back a couple of slides with respect to the personnel savings plan. This is for you and Mr. Sears. Is that something that we see ourselves visiting on an annual basis as far as who is eligible and who is not? Or maybe that's for Mr. Spinner, but I'm just curious, is that something we intend to continue to do, to find efficiencies there?
Yeah, I'll let Mr. Spinner go a little deeper into this, but I believe that, and you can allude to this, Mr. Spinner, that the The benefits of that are short-term for us as far as the people that are eligible because the rules change. So if you want to go into deeper on that? for us?
Yeah, so this time around, it was 5 years of service and age 60 or age 65 or 60 and 34 years of service, somewhere along those lines. There's certain benchmarks that you have to hit through the Ohio Department of Education. I'm sorry, I don't have my notes in front of me. But they recently have changed those rules to age 57 and 35 years. So that could potentially mean that there are more employees that would be eligible for this type of savings plan.
Okay.
I definitely think it's worthy of a conversation going forward, but that would have to be on a year-to-year basis, depending upon how many of our employees would benefit and what kind of cost savings it would provide us.
But there's no doubt it's worth looking at it every year.
Absolutely. Actually, I think it would be for Mrs. Martin. I saw where we, with respect to preschool, we doubled the number of special education students. And it just, in layman's terms, how is that impacting us?
I saw your face when you saw that slide. I did. I knew you were like, oh. So my first year here was 2014, 2015. At the end of the year, we had 38 special education preschoolers, right? This year, we'll end up a little over 100. My first year here, we're at about 6 sessions. Next year, we'll have 14. So when you add sections, that is a classroom, that's teacher, that's the equipment. The other thing to follow the state rules around preschool, because preschool rules around special ed are different than K-12. You have to do a 50-50. So you have to have a typical for every single special ed student you have. So you have to keep your ratio in balance. So you can't change rooms. You can't do different numbers. We're very specific about what numbers, what rooms look like. So we've pretty much 3 years ago, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 years ago, Matt, we took over this whole wing underneath of us that wasn't King's Preschool. 6 or 7 years ago, we had to add those classrooms. We've taken almost every single room we can find downstairs to create more sections for preschool, because the move-in for preschool is just every single year. I think it'll stop. And I'm surprised by the number the following year. So we've gradually from 38 to 50 to 60 to, I thought we'd be at like about 95 this year. We're going to be in the hundreds by the time June rolls around, because we have to, anytime a kid turns 3, we have to do an eval, right? If they're with Help Me Grow. So we know our numbers are going up. We have a list from Help Me Grow already for next year. So it just kind of hits everything, because you have to add for those students. And that's related services, that's speech, OT, PT, all of that.
So you're saying 100 for the 22, 23.
Yeah, so what you do is you end, so we'll end with about 100. Roughly about a third of those will go on to kindergarten. So then we start back around 55 and grow to a little over 100 by the end of the year.
Okay,
So
I see.
our beginning number keeps going up and our ending number keeps going up. So that's why you have to add space, because if you start with 55 or 60, you're going to grow about 50. So you have to have the space for those students, because you can't not. And then you have to have the typicals also. So just more classrooms, really, more teachers, things like that.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Ms. Martin. And Mr. Morrow, preschool enrollment fees, they don't cover the totality. They don't cover all of these expenses.
No, they do not. It's
Okay.
subsidized by the rest of district funds. So when we look at the forecast and we look at our general fund, which is our operating fund, all the fees are captured in there, and then all the expenses are captured in there also. And the fees are helping to offset basically money we don't get from the state. Kindergarten students, if they're not special education, aren't funded as a K through 12 student is.
Right.
So that's simply trying to keep up with the money that we're already getting for the other kids, the K through 12 kids.
Okay.
So no, tuition does not cover preschool.
Okay. Thank you.
As I said, please stop me at any time. More than happy. So one other thing we wanted to look at was what are our staffing levels. I used data from the state of Ohio, and the most recent that I had available was the 2020. So this is a little bit off compared to the rest of it, but still, we've added 600 kids, and the number of staff that are reported to the state of Ohio has only gone up 25 or 29, excuse me. So I think that continues to show that we're only adding staff when we need to, and it's constantly on our mind of, are we going to add a staff member or not? And do we have to? So I thought that was a good number to show that we've gone up 600 kids and we've gone up 29 staff members.
Does that number include preschool staff?
Correct, it does. Yes. Granted, we do contract some services out, such as
Right.
transportation. We contract some services out, such as custodial. So it's hard to compare apples to apples, but truly with 600 kids and only 29 staff added on, I think it's telling that we're not just adding to add. Sure.
I mean, it's clear that we've grown tremendously since 2016.
Yeah.
The last couple of years have been significant growth.
Mhm.
Has there been any estimates for next year, or are we seeing enrollment numbers coming in yet, or is that always like all it?
Mr. Spinner, do you have the most up-to-date kindergarten information? Because I know that's always a good gauge to look at when the seniors graduate compared to when the kindergarten's coming in. And last time we checked, it was right on track with what it's been the last few years.
Yeah, last I spoke to Miss Andrews was last week about this, and we're up over 260 as far as kindergarten registrations, and those come in pretty steady over the summer. And we do have a lot of late ads as we get into August, and final registrations appear.
Okay.
Which is the trend we've seen over previous years.
So we touched on a little bit about the districts and things that we've done to save money. We talked about these in more detail in May. More than happy to answer any questions, but I did want to circle back to the last 3 bullet points. Just reiterate level of service expectations by every staff member, board member, community member that I've talked to. Kings expects to be one of those top 50 districts. So making cuts and initially when we're in financial trouble, it doesn't seem like the right path to go, because when we start making cuts to student services, that's opportunities and many other things. So that's guided us to talk more about a levy instead of just cutting student services. I also wanted to take one more look at our cash balance and our expenses. I've gotten some questions about, well, we have projected at 6/30/22 to have $10.4 million or just under. That's a lot of money. I agree, that's a lot of money. But when you're an organization that spends over $59 million a year, that 10.4, 10.38 doesn't take you very far. It takes you 64 days to be exact. So if all of our inflows stop, we could operate for 64 days. As I mentioned at the last meeting, the threshold that's established by the governmental finance organization is 60 days. So we're right there. We've lost money, meaning expenses have exceeded revenues for 3 years in a row. So we're going to be touching that 60 days cash very soon. The latest forecast had us losing over $4.5 million next year. So in 1 year, basically half of our cash remaining is gone. And we spend over or right at $5 million every month just to operate the school. So yes, $10.4 million is a lot of money. But that also needs put in proportion to what we spend as a district. So just wanted to point that out one more time. I've gotten some questions from community members and board members and
I
kind of
have-
wanted to put some perspective.
I have a question for you
Sure.
then. Knowing that we're close to that 60-day limit,
Mhm.
when does, and I think you've answered it before, the state say, what's your plan? What are you gonna do? You can't run out of money in the middle of the year, I assume.
Correct. You're there and we're there. We're already working with the state of Ohio on course correction plan. It has to get pretty dire for them to completely step in. And by dire, I mean, you're gonna run out of money next year. At that point, you've pretty well hit the thresholds that they've established. So if I had to file an updated forecast a year from now and say that we were on track to run out of money, then the state would swoop in and replace our board and potentially Mr. Sears and myself, and they would do whatever they pleased. Which, as I said last time, we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that doesn't happen. But you're 100% spot on that it is a possibility. And I'm already working with the state on our recovery plan.
Mr. Morrow, what, you mentioned like a $4.5 million number?
Yeah.
What was that? I don't see that on the schedule.
We'll get there in a second, but
Okay.
that's the next year
Okay,
without any changes to revenue or major cuts. So we'll get there.
Okay.
I just wanted to really focus on where we're at in our current situation. Because I know projections, things change. We do the best we can to create a forecast and create estimates with the information we have now. But things change. But I wanted to reiterate the situation we're in, which is by any metric, we don't have enough cash and we're losing it. We have for 3 years. So that was kind of the point of where I'm at right now with this one. And then we'll get to your point here in just a
Okay.
minute.
thank you.
If you could, Mr. Morrow, could you go back a slide and just comment on the state funding low and flat? I know we talked it last month, but just quick refresher on that, what you mean by that? Please.
Absolutely. So I touched on the low part, meaning that we don't get very much per pupil. So the state determines how much a school gets from them in their funding model by how much can and should that school pay for their own kids. So we are an above average district in property values, an above average district in income levels. So they don't think that we need as much help as other districts. So that's the low piece. The flat piece, their formula says they're already giving us more than they should be. In state law currently, they've set a bar that we're not going to give you any less than we gave you in 2020. But they're not giving us any more than that based on their current formula. And in a few years, we're going to be millions of dollars projected to be getting millions of dollars from the state of Ohio that their formula says we shouldn't be giving it to you. So we're what they call guaranteed. I mean, we're getting the guarantee amount that's in state law right now, but that could change and their formula could change. So when I do a forecast and I look out, I go with what the current law is, what the current funding model is. And right now they say they're giving us more than their calculation says they should be.
Is there any risk that that'll go down?
Absolutely. This new funding model is brand new. This is the first year that it's been in existence. And it treated urban districts very well. But I think there's a lot more districts that are guaranteed than they expected. I don't know that for a fact, but a lot of schools I talk to, they are also guaranteed districts. So I guess I don't know whether or not it's working as well as they thought it would, because there's also districts on the other side of it that are what they call capped. meaning that the district set a level that you as a district, you're going to get no more than this from us. So they should be getting a lot more based on the state formula, but they're capped. So there's districts in the complete opposite of us. So this is the formula for 2 years, meaning this year and this coming school year. And then we'll see what the legislator wants to do. But yes, you're 100% right. They could say the guarantee's gone. They could say the cap's gone. They could say we're going to scrap this whole way we fund schools and go with a different method. But we project and forecast what is happening right now. And right now they're giving us more than they think they should be. So I showed this at the last meeting, but I just wanted to show it one more time for a little perspective on what has happened at Kings as far as operating money. We just talked about that we're a self-locally funded district. We've continuously relied on levies over the years. The most recent that actually didn't make it to the ballot was just last year. It was a different administration and a different board to a large degree, but they made the first step into putting a 6.9 mil levy on that was projected to last 3 to 4 years at that time. The steps weren't completed to actually put that on the ballot, but there is board motion to get that process rolling. So anytime we're talking about levies for additional revenues or cuts, we're thinking about how are people affected, how are kids affected, how are taxpayers affected. And based on data that I pulled down from the auditor, the Warren County auditor, there's nearly 900 or 9,000 single family residences in the King School District. Median home value for those schools for tax purposes. And once again, this isn't what you think you can sell your house for. This is what's actually on the auditor's website. So that median value, or right in the middle of all the houses, is $244,920. And anyone can look up what their home value is simply by going to the Warren County's website. Pull it up just so everybody can take a look at what that would look like and how easy it is to use. Maybe.
Put that together here.
So while I'm on the Warren County Auditor's website, I can go to property search and I can search by my name. I can search by my address. Those are both on top. Typically, when I use this, I would just put in street number, which is your house number, and then street name, which is your house name. And honestly, most of the time, if you put in the street number, that kind of narrows it down. So I live at 3048. So I would type in 3048 in the street number, search, and I would be on the list, and I could click on my name, and that would show me what the county auditor had my house valued at. So this is what you're actually taxed on. You may think that you can sell your house for whatever you think you can sell your house for, but the number for tax purposes is what's on here. So if the board doesn't have any additional questions at this time, we can start to take a look at some of the scenarios that we kind of touched on last meeting. We tried to make it so we were looking at levies by number of years we're estimating they'll last based on a conservative estimate. And that was 3, 4, and 5. So I've had those charted out on our financials and on our forecast, and then also a couple additional ones that I threw in that I thought maybe the board would want to see. And then between now and the next meeting, be more than happy to look at any others.
Can I ask a property tax question?
Absolutely.
You talked about the single family residences.
Mhm.
What about apartments? How does that work with property taxes for the district?
Those property taxes are paid by the building of the apartment, or the owner of the building, and that would be built into your rent. But when I talked about nearly 9,000, I did include condominiums in that number because typically you are the owner of your condominium. So it made sense to include that in, but I did not include those apartment buildings where the tenants are not paying taxes, their landlord is.
And we do have apartments where there, for various reasons, we don't collect property taxes from them. Is that correct? Like the Peters Cartridge apartments, we're not receiving property taxes from them.
There are some where we do not receive property tax. We receive basically an in lieu of payment. It's part of an economic development type deal where in lieu of paying their property tax, they pay a reduced rate. So we still receive some revenue from that, but it's through it. They call it a tax abatement rather than paying the actual property tax. So yes, you are correct.
And as far as our businesses, that we get tax income from them,
Mhm.
the lot that's now going to be the hospital, we were receiving some property tax from that lot before the hospital was being built. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But now that the hospital's under construction, we no longer have that income stream.
That is correct. They're a nonprofit. They pay as much property tax as the school does, which is none.
So we did have a loss of income and we won't get any income from the hospital, just so
Yes,
people
you,
understand.
you are correct. Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you.
Can we go back to the Warren County site? Because I know a lot of community members have questions about this.
Absolutely.
When you go into the property search.
Yep.
You are looking at under, when you actually put an address in there, and I don't think anybody wants their address put in right now, but it talks about value summary. There's a true value and assessed value. So they would be calculating.
They would be using the true value because in Ohio's complex tax calculation laws, that true value is taken times 35% to get to your assessed value. But we're talking about the true value when we're looking at numbers here.
Okay.
So thank you for that clarification.
I just want to make sure people know what number they're.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a good catch. Thank you.
Follow up to Ms. Cowan's question. So what was the revenue stream we were getting from that lot that we're no longer getting?
I don't know off the top of my head. It was one of those things that it's been zero since I got here, so I didn't spend too much time dwelling on what was. But I can absolutely get that for yourself and anybody
I'm
else.
curious to see what that lost revenue is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think I remember that number, but I don't want to say it. 'Cause I don't want to quote it.
Me
So if you
too.
could look it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, two scenarios. So we'll start with just the basic forecast. This is what was board approved back in May and what was submitted to the state of Ohio. So you see fiscal year 22, which is the year ending June 30th of this month. We're projected to lose over $2 million and end with around 10.4. The next year, Mr. Squirrel, the $4.6 million loss. That's what I was referring to.
Yep, I get it. Thank you.
Yep. So 2023, we're projected to spend $4.6 million more than we bring in, bringing our ending balance below $6 million. And then if you look at the next year, which is fiscal year 24, we're projected to go negative at some point towards the end of the fiscal year. So the first number that we talked about last meeting was what we projected to be a 3-year levy cycle at 6.4 mils. So if we look out, we would start collecting money in 2023, fiscal year 2023, that's the spring through June 30th. But we would only collect half in that fiscal year, because if you think about your property taxes, you pay some in the spring and some in the fall if you're somebody who pays directly. So we collect the same way. So when people pay their first half property tax, we receive it in the spring, typically the April timeframe, but then our new fiscal year starts July 1. So we don't collect the second part of that until after July. So we don't see a full year of tax collections until fiscal year 2024. So under this model, we project to run out of money again in 2027. But I do want to caution the board that when we're looking out 4 to 5, 6 years down the line, a lot's going to change. So that's when I say conservative, we're trying to make sure we meet our mark as far as for it to actually last the 3 years that we say. But the hope is that we'll be able to extend that out further by being creative in our operations and cost saving methods, and maybe the state would actually give us some more money for once. That would always help.
So I want to ask a question about that. Maybe Ms. Phillips, you can help me with this. I know I had a few conversations, community members who under the impression that the 2016 levy was actually slated to actually last 6 years, but I believe it was presented on the ballot for 3 years. So to your point, Mr. Morrow, being able to double the time frame of that levy was due to some considerable work by our Treasury Department and the cost-cutting measures that we've had in place for several years. Is that, because I don't recall ever seeing anything that suggested that levy was actually supposed to go 6 years, but I've gotten that question quite a bit. I'm just asking, I just want to confirm that and make sure I'm on the right track there.
Yes, when that levy was placed on the ballot, it was thought to be able to last 3 years.
Okay.
The second number that we touched on last meeting was what we thought would last 4 years. And that is 6.9 mils. So if you remember from the last graph, that number was negative out in 2027, and now it's positive. So everything's kind of shifted out a little bit as far as the levy lasting longer. Then the last one that we talked about or touched on last meeting was 7.4 mils. And this is where we thought that we could make it last 5 years. So you can see all the way out here, that number being larger than before. But I also wanted to point out when we were talking about this, at no point in time, this line, our ending balance, in none of these scenarios were growing substantially, and the amount of cash that we have, we're kind of staying pretty steady, just kind of keeping us going, which, as I said, you can't look out more than 2 to 3 years at what's going to happen just because there's so many variables. But I did want to point out that in none of these we're attempting to get a large spike in our cash reserves. We're just trying to kind of keep moving along as with the services that we currently provide students, and also some additional things which we'll touch on here shortly. Was a couple others that I thought I would throw up here just so the board could have a look at and kind of see what they thought and have a conversation about potentially. 6.2 mils. That also falls within the range of lasting roughly 3 years based on the current forecast. Not a huge difference from 6.4. And then 6.7, that also falls in that 4-year levy life range. And once again, none of these are giving us huge cash windfalls. It's just kind of keeping us going for a few years.
So when we're looking at those increased expenditures year over year, is that using the 3.1% that we've had from 2016 through now?
No, it's actually substantially more complex than that.
Okay.
So I have conversations with all of our administrators, with superintendent, and we talk about what we see spending trends do. So we'll sit in a meeting and I'll listen and take notes as far as that we see this going up, that going up. I'll look at the inflation going on.
Currently, we've got prices going up
Yes.
much higher than that. So is that taking
Yes.
into consideration current?
Yes, it
Real
is.
time, okay.
Yeah, current trend. And then payroll, for example, and benefits. We have what I call the personnel master sheet that has every single employee and what they make on it, and have that projected out 5 years. And those numbers get plugged into this. With benefits, we go with market trend traditionally, which is right around 10%. So there can be some variance in that. If we had a lot of teachers retire and replaced all of them with step 0 teachers, that could cause a huge swing.
Mhm.
I tried to build some of that in as far as, okay, well, it looks like we may have a few retire in a couple years based on their age and experience. So I try to build in some of that. And I also try to build in the expectation of increased needs of our students, which causes staffing to go up. So no, the short answer is no, we don't use the 3.1%. It's a lot of conversations, a lot of work. It's pretty complex.
Without going too far into the weeds, let's assume we put X amount on the ballot. And I know sometimes, least of all, a couple of my neighbors had said, will I pay that amount then forever for the loan, for the levy that's passed? So.
Without going too far into the weeds, the short answer is as long as your house value goes up and the house value in the area goes up, you will not pay that amount forever. And that's based on state law. Basically, it says that you're going to collect the same amount that you collected barring any new construction. So as your house value goes up, the rate that you're taxed goes down.
Okay,
And
thank
how
you.
does new construction impact that, Mr. Moore?
New construction, you actually gain revenues from that because at one point in time it was an empty lot, but that's readjusted back down to get you back to this number. But if year after year it's new construction, then and that construction's growing, then you would collect more. But eventually that new construction just becomes part of the overall pot and helps lower the existing value.
But with new construction comes new kids, so
Yes, yes, it does.
More expenses.
Yes, we get a short-term bump in our revenues and then we have additional kids that we have to spend money on. Absolutely. So as I said, big picture here, we're trying to keep it as simple as possible, 3 to 5 years. Ending balance stays relatively consistent until you get to the end and I mean, ending cash balance, because we're not trying to fill our coffers. We're just trying to be able to give kids the education that they deserve when they come to King's. But we'll look at a couple scenarios as far as what that would do to a taxpayer. So if we pull here. Zoom in. That's probably good. So this is a calculator that I built based on some different valuations as well as what the current effective school tax rate is. I got that from the Ohio Department of Education. So as I plug in a number here, it shows what it does to a $100,000 home, a $244,920 home, which, as I said, is that house that's kind of right in the middle of all the homes in the district. And then I put 300,000 on here just to go a little bit higher, but we could plug in anything we wanted.
And that's the true values according to the auditor's page, correct?
Correct. That is the page or the information that the auditor has for your home, not what you think you can sell it for.
Okay.
So on the low end of the scenarios that we looked at, we had 6.2. So you could see a house that falls right in the middle is paying over $3,000 a year to King's already, $3,264. That levy would cause their taxes to go up by $531,000 or $531, excuse me.
Have right, get up and leave.
Oh. Monthly. Appreciate that. Monthly, that's like $44, 14% increase. If you go a little bit higher, look at say 6.7, that kind of middle house goes up $574 a year or $48 a month. So we've gone from 6.2 to 6.7 and the monthly cost has gone up roughly $4. Go just a little bit higher. Once again, looking at that median house, since that's the house that's right in the middle of our district, their taxes went up $591 with a 6.9 mil levy or $49 a month. So just a little bit more than the 6.7 that was on the last slide. I did want to point out that those numbers that I'm plugging in, these are kind of the 3 and 4 year estimated range, and that matches historically what the district passed since 2010. There was a 6.9, 6.2, so keeping it right in that range. We went out to 7.4, which we project would be 5 years. That median house goes up $634 or $53 a month. So about $5 a month more than that kind of middle range. But the 7.4 is a little bit higher levy than what's been passed in the last 12 years or so in Kings. So just wanted to put some perspective on it.
Do you have that slide handy for the past levies?
Absolutely. Yeah, get right over there.
I'm sorry, I know it was bad.
And those levy scenarios that you broke down the cost, is that something you can provide us for each amount? That we can have like,
Absolutely.
we can have copies of.
Mhm. So I can make it so you can plug in any amount that you would like for a house value.
That would be good too.
Yeah, and then
Okay.
you just type in something and it'll automatically update. Absolutely.
I'm just trying to relate economic times that were tough in history, recent history.
Mhm.
So I would think the 2010 would be most comparison to what we're going on right now in our economy. I mean, 2008 was when it hit terribly, right? But we were still recovering in 2010,
Absolutely.
correct? Is anybody around here on the board in 2010? That's how that was.
So the board will have access to that information that I just shared, and I can share it with anybody else who would like to use a calculator, or take a look at the scenarios. As I said, we tried to keep it simple as far as conservative 3, 4, and 5 year, what those levies would look like. So if the board does elect to put on a levy and it passes, what are some things that will happen?
Thank you, Mr. Morrow, for lobbing it over to me for this portion.
Let the educator speak.
Yeah, that's good. Appreciate all the analysis that you've done leading up to this point. And I think it's important to know as we're making decisions and we're analyzing our current programming and finances and where we're going and what we need to accomplish the level of service expectations that our community has. We are a high performing district, want to continue to grow on our ranking across the state of Ohio, want to continue to do those things. And so it's, that level of service expectation, like Mr. Morrow outlined earlier in this conversation, is important. And so if the board elects to put a levy on the ballot and it passes, we would be looking to continue to maintain many of the great programming that we currently have, providing opportunities for our kids, and then looking at efficient ways to continue to grow not only our students and our staff and our administrators in our district, but increase our performance and increase the opportunities that we have for students. So a lot of this is maintenance, and it's maintaining the quality that we currently have, but then there will be ongoing continued analysis to efficiently offer futuristic learning opportunities and educational opportunities for our students. So I just want to say that over the course of the past few months, we've engaged in a lot of work around the future of learning, the future of our school district, the future of where we're going. And we're narrowing that down through the administrative team, working with a collaborative group of teachers in our district as well to say, okay, what does the future hold for us and where are we going? And a lot of that gets into providing personalized learning opportunities for our kids, meeting the individual academic needs of students, as well as looking at the future of where and what our kids need to be successful beyond the walls of our school district. So what are those experiential learning opportunities? What are those skill development that needs to happen? And with that, a lot of those pieces are going to drive the professional growth throughout our district. And so as I point a couple things out here, is that the slide mainly talks about that we're going to maintain the quality, but there's aspirational work among this team and the Board of Education to increase the opportunities that we have with our students through external partnerships, experienceships, critical skill development throughout school age, as well as academic performance. And so there's great desire to continue to do that work and grow that and feel like we can. And it doesn't always lend itself to additional money to add new things. We're take the things that we have and use them in a different way to increase performance. I do want to note on there that we do have putting things around. I talk about personalizing the educational experience for students, growing our experiential learning opportunities, and obviously hot topic right now, and very rightfully so, it should be, is looking at how we increase safety and wellness personnel and program investments. I think that's in education right now and in the world in general, how we keep folks safe and provide opportunities to do that, as well as that wellness piece. Those are very important things that we are having ongoing conversations right now that may need to look different in the future as we continue to analyze and learn what's taken place in the environments that have experienced some very tragic loss. And so these are heavy burdens that we carry to how do we keep our folks safe, as well as grow them academically, social emotionally, and prepare them for existence beyond our district. So I'm going off script just a little bit, really passionate about this work and believe that some of the outlines that Mr. Morrow has presented and some of the questions that have come up, I just want the community to know, in this Board of Education, though, that if a levy would be selected to be put on the ballot, then the voters would actually approve that. You have a commitment from this administration that we're going to do some really amazing things for our students and our staff. And so we're really excited about that moving forward. So flipping the conversation to the other side, if it doesn't, okay, the reality of it is if it doesn't, then a lot of the things that I just talked about are impacted. A lot of the things that the futuristic, the future growth things we're doing are impacted, and we're having discussions and utilizing time, energy, and resources to look at how we cut costs, how we operate differently, how we manage and maintain within the what we have, and so it's looking at our class sizes. You know, we're a high portion of our district is made up of personnel costs through salaries and benefits. And to make significant reductions, it's going to impact personnel. And that's where the class size potentially increasing, staffing reductions. We'll look at our course offerings. We just had a conversation around personalizing and those academic choice offerings. We may not be able to do that. Looking at some of the wellness personnel, student support services, restructuring how we offer extracurriculars, and then even restructuring transportation in general. Other districts have been through certain things like this. There's some of the standard pieces that we would look at initially for potential reductions. Over time, we'll get more specific with what this may look like. But the reality is that the expectations will need to change in the district. Right now, we've talked about the community expectations that we have. It'll need to look different. And our primary goals may shift from futuristic learning, personalization for our students, to fiscal adjustments that are needed. So our priorities would shift a little bit. So I put that out there very generally, just so our community and our board can see, to know that it is important. The things that we're asking for are not to add, it's to maintain. We have a commitment from us to do things differently. I think we're starting to demonstrate some of that work, and I know that we feel really good about where we're going with that, with some of the future work we're doing. So if there's any questions on those pieces, I'm happy to entertain. It's not as data-driven and scientifically analyzed as Mr. Morrow at this point, but will be over time.
But it is, Mr. Sears, Mr. Morrow, correct me if I'm wrong, it is driven by some of the obligations we have to the state, though, right? I mean, we can't operate in a deficit, correct? Or a balanced budget, and we do have to have a certain amount of cash reserve, to your point earlier, as required by that department in Columbus. So we can't, these are not, what I'm saying is to community is like, these are not scare tactics, right? These are things that we would have to do in order to be able to maintain those requirements going forward.
That is correct. And also to kind of build on that, we need a certain level of money just to be able to make payroll twice a month and continue to pay bills in a timely manner. So there comes a point where you're worried about making payroll.
Right.
And I think we have to constantly keep in the back of our mind, Stacy, you alluded to it, the unfunded mandates that might come down from the State Department that we're expected to implement and do, but they're not going to give us money possibly to implement and do.
That's correct.
Tough conversations and hard choices. We're outlining here some of those pieces that are going to be impacted. And so there'll be choices on what that looks like specifically. And again, that the amount necessary over time, but right now I think our focus is, this is a reality, but the focus on if the board elects to move forward in this direction, it will be to, our focus is on growth. Our focus is on, that the other side of the coin as far as this goes.
I had a question about the impact on student support services. With the services we're legally required to have, there wouldn't be an impact, but you're saying that services that would be considered optional would have the impact. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, we would. Mr. Martin can probably talk a little bit more specifically about this, but I'll just keep it at a very high level at this point. But yes, we are bound by student individualized education plans to provide services based on their needs, based on the disability that they have.
Right.
So we're required and will continue to offer those services. There are other things that we do in Kings for students that are benefiting them overall, that are also helping our teachers work with students in classrooms. Those are some of those. Again, I'm going to keep it at a very general level, not calling out anything specific, but those are some of the support services that we have that enable our students to be more successful. That's where but anything driven by their IEP, we will continue to have to offer.
I just wanted to allay any concerns that people listening might have about that. Thank you.
Yep.
What might restructured extracurriculars or restructured transportation, what would that look like?
So again, I'm not going to we'll get more specific over time, but restructuring, here's an example, and this is what the number of teams that are offered, for example. And so if we have X number of teams, that a restructuring could be, we offer less teams. So that's an example. Restructured transportation, it could be some of the things that through the transportation group we're going to put together for next year, and Mr. Morrow outlined this, is how we're even offering in routes that are run. It could be tiered system. It could be, do we have transportation at certain levels? So without getting into any specifics, a restructuring of transportation mean it would look different than what we have right now. And the methodology would be behind that. It would move away from in the best interest of our students, and it would really move into in the best interest of saving money. So I think that's all of these components here, is that we try to make decisions in the best interest of our students overall. But when you're in these types of scenarios, you have to, the premise of the question changes, and the why changes, that we would be making decisions in the best interest of saving money at the time. And so we may not have as many offerings for extracurriculars or run as many routes or tiers or those things. So again, I'm very general without getting into the specifics of that. Over time, we would certainly be able to provide much more specific information on what that looks like.
So my last slide, and then we'll take any questions or comments, is just kind of the next steps if the board is going to go down this path, and laid this out in May also, that we need to get a resolution. The first one passed in June, and that's declaring necessity to the county auditor that we need some information. July would need passed a resolution to proceed with actually being on the ballot. And then I would work with the Board of Elections at that point to actually put it on the ballot for November 8th. So just wanted to spell out that timeline again, that we've had a lot of conversations about district finances the past 2.5 months. And now we're to the point where if we're going to go down this path, the board is going to have to formally take action to start that process.
So we walked through multiple different scenarios here.
Yep.
At what point in this timeline do we need to, as a board, agree this is what we're moving forward with? Would that be the July 12th or August 10th, or would that need to be by next week's June 14th meeting?
At June 14th, we would be declaring what the board wants to move forward with.
Okay, so not just if we want to do it, but this is our
This is
plan,
it.
is what we're doing. Okay.
Because we would send that to the county auditor who would work up some numbers for us to get what that would look like.
I don't have a question, it's more of a comment. But I think the community needs to know that, I mean, we are really trying to make the best decision here. And I know this is not easy. I think in the past year, we've seen a lot of signs that this was coming. So I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. I mean, it goes back to, this was almost on the ballot last year, to an entire new board running, and all 8 candidates said that we needed a levy. So that was very clear. But then we interviewed new treasurers, and each candidate that interviewed stated, you need a levy. Like, that was in their interview when they came to us. So I don't want anyone in the community to think that this isn't careful consideration that we are taking right now. So, I mean, John and I knocked on a lot of doors, and I saw the insides of a lot of houses, and I care about everybody.
I think it also shows last year, when you weren't yet on the board, some of the due diligence when we said because of COVID and some of the things that Governor DeWine did for all school districts, that we were able to say, yeah, we can wait for another year. And that was a tough decision too, as we looked at everything, but
I'm sure
again,
that was.
taking into account what's going to be best for our families.
Right. It's just very unfortunate the way Ohio funds our schools. You know, coming here from another state, it's very different, and it's unfortunate. And I don't know that all community members understand how little money our school districts get. And it's a hard time economically for families. So I just feel for everybody, and it's a hard decision.
Absolutely. I think one of the key things, Mrs. Phillips, you alluded to this too. You know, it hasn't actually been a two month, maybe 2 months you're new, but we've actually been discussing this for a couple of years now with some financial reviews. And I think one of the things that's critical that our community takes away from this is that we have an administrative team that take their stewardship of our income, your tax monies very seriously. And we are very efficient as a district in how we spend money. And, the expectation of this board, this administration is to continue to do so. Whatever the, decisions we make and whatever those outcomes may be. But, I think I'd still maintain, and I said this at commencement, we're one of the best districts in the state of Ohio. I mean, based on what we spend, how we spend it, and what you get as a service offering for your children is second to none, in my opinion. So that, yeah, we take that very seriously, and I'll say it for me personally, I would just hate to see that be diminished in some way by us having to make decisions. But I brought up what I said earlier, Mr. Sears, Mr. Morrow, just because I've had people say that they think it's, when you start talking about what we would have to do, those are, a means to kind of scare people, but they're not. I mean, we have, to your point, Mrs. Grob, I think a lot of people don't realize, the requirements we have with respect to cash on hand, and then the implications if we don't, and then we just can't operate in the red. We can't do that. So, I would hope, we can get this out. Are you going to have this slide deck on the website at all, or your treasury site?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. It'll be on the treasurer's page. And there's a whole series on financial stability. So as you said, the board, the district's been having this conversation for upwards of 2 years. So all of that can be found. So all the information I've provided since I've started, and then all the information that was provided by my predecessor, Mr. Furness, it's all archived on there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We have any more questions? Discussion items? No. With that, let me get back to the agenda. May I have a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting?
I will make that motion.
I'll second the motion.
Mr. Morrow?
Ms. Cowan,
Yes.
Ms. Phillips,
Yes.
Ms. Groff,
Yes.
Mr. Skrull,
Yes.
Mr. Belfron.
Yes.